There was a man who had nothing left to sell except his pride. His name was Daniel Mercer. A painter. Not the famous kind. The kind who eats cold soup from a can and stares at unfinished canvases at 2 in the morning wondering where everything went wrong. He was 34. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Pittsburgh. The walls were thin. The pipes rattled every night. His landlord had slipped a final eviction notice under his door on a Tuesday. Daniel had read it 3 times, then folded it, then put it under his coffee cup like it was just a coaster. He had $41 in his bank account. He had a box of old paints, maybe 100 brushes, and 17 finished paintings that nobody wanted to buy. But here is the part that stayed with people long after they heard this story. He didn't give up. Not exactly. He did something strange instead. He wrote a letter, not an email. Not a social media message. A real letter, handwritten, 3 pages long, on the back of used printer paper. Because he couldn't afford a notepad dot, and he sent it to one of the richest men in America. A man named Gerald Holt, tech billionaire, self-made, known for being cold, direct, and impossible to reach. His assistant had an assistant. His office received over 2,000 letters a month. Most of them never got opened. Daniel knew all of this. He sent the letter anyway. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever poured your heart into something and felt like the world just looked away, then this story is for you. And before we go further, if stories like this move you, subscribe, hit that bell, because the next part of this story is the part nobody expected. Now, the letter, Daniel didn't beg in it. That's the thing. Most people expected him to. He didn't ask for money. He didn't explain how broke he was. He didn't list his struggles like a resin of pain. He wrote about a painting, one specific painting. He had finished the night his mother died, 2 years before. A painting he had never shown anyone. He described every color in it, every brushstroke. He wrote about why he made it and what it cost him emotionally to finish it. He wrote about what art meant to him, not as a career but as a language. The only language he had ever felt fluent in. Then, at the very end, he wrote one sentence that would later be quoted in newspapers and speeches and art galleries from New York to London. He wrote, "I am not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to look." That was it. He sealed the envelope, walked to the post office in the rain, mailed it with his last stamp, then he went home, sat on his floor, and cried. Not because he was sad exactly, but because something about sending that letter felt like the last real thing he had done in years. Like he had finally told the truth to someone, even if that someone would never read it. 3 weeks passed, he heard nothing. He stopped checking his mailbox after the first week. He picked up a part-time dishwashing job at a diner 2 blocks away. He worked nights. He came home smelling like grease and soap. He stopped painting. Then, on a cold Thursday morning in November, something arrived. Not an email. Not a phone call, a letter hand-delivered by a man in a dark coat who knocked twice, waited, and handed Daniel a cream-colored envelope without saying a single word. Daniel's hands were shaking before he even opened it. Asterisk, asterisk. The envelope had no return address. Just Daniel's name on the front, written in sharp, clean handwriting. Like someone who had learned penmanship before the age of keyboards. He opened it standing in his doorway, still in his dishwashing uniform, still tired. The hallway light above him was flickering. It had been flickering for 3 months. His landlord never fixed anything. Inside was a single sheet of paper, 2 paragraphs. That was all. The first paragraph said that Gerald Holt had read Daniel's letter personally. Not a staff member, not an intern. He had read it on a Sunday morning in his home office. He had read it twice. The second paragraph was short, 4 sentences, but every word landed like a stone, dropped into still water. Gerald wrote that he had not felt anything from art in over 20 years. He wrote that he had stopped believing art could still surprise him. Then he wrote that Daniel's description of that painting, The one made the night his mother died had made him sit in silence for a long time. He said he didn't know exactly what that meant, but he wanted to find out. At the bottom was a phone number, a real one, and a time, Thursday, 4 o'clock. That was it. Daniel read the letter 4 times. Then he sat on his kitchen floor, the same floor where he had cried 3 weeks earlier, and he laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not exactly. The kind of laugh that comes out when something is so unexpected your body doesn't know what else to do. He called the number Thursday at exactly 4 o'clock. His phone was cracked. The screen had a black line across the bottom from when he had dropped it 6 months ago and couldn't afford to replace it. Someone answered on the second ring. It was Gerald Holt himself. No assistant. No introduction. Just a man's voice. Low, measured, the kind of voice that was used to being listened to. He said, "Tell me about the painting." And Daniel did. For 40 minutes, Daniel talked. He described the colors first. A deep blue-green he had mixed himself because no store-bought color was exactly right. A pale, almost gray-white that he had used for the light in the corner, the light his mother always left on in the hallway at night, even when Daniel was grown and visiting, because she said it was a habit she couldn't break. He described how he had started the painting at midnight. The night she passed, how he hadn't planned to paint. He had just picked up the brush because he needed somewhere to put what he was feeling, and words had failed him completely. He talked about the brush strokes. The ones that were rough, almost violent, and then the softer ones. The ones that came after 3 hours, when the grief had started to move through him instead of pressing down on him. Gerald didn't say much. He asked a few quiet questions. He wanted to know what his mother's name was. He wanted to know what she looked like. He asked if Daniel had any photographs of the painting. Daniel said yes. 3 photos, taken with his phone. Blurry around the edges. Gerald asked him to send them. That night, Daniel sent the photos. He used the last of his phone's data to email them. Then he plugged his phone in, lay down on his mattress, and stared at the ceiling. He didn't sleep. Not really. Something was happening. He could feel it. Like a shift in the air before a storm. Like the moment right before everything changes and the world doesn't know it yet. He just didn't know what kind of storm it was going to be. And neither did Gerald Holt, though. That would change very soon. Asterisk, asterisk, 2 days later. A black car parked outside Daniel's building. Daniel saw it from his window. He almost didn't think anything of it. Then it stayed there. Engine off. Nobody getting out. He went downstairs. The same man in the dark coat from before was standing by the car. He said Gerald Holt would like to see the painting. In person. If Daniel was willing. Daniel stood there in his doorway in old jeans and a paint-stained sweatshirt. He said yes. Of course he said yes. The man asked if he could bring the painting. Now. Daniel said he needed 20 minutes. He went back upstairs. He didn't change his clothes. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because changing felt like pretending. And Daniel was done pretending. He wrapped the painting in an old bedsheet and carried it down. They drove for 40 minutes outside the city. The landscape changed. The roads got quieter. The houses got further apart. Then they turned through a set of iron gates and down a long driveway lined with bare trees. The house was large but not flashy. Stone walls. Dark wood. The kind of house that said old money very quietly. Without trying, Gerald Holt was waiting at the door. He was shorter than Daniel had imagined. 60s, silver hair, neatly combed. Dark eyes that moved quickly, taking in everything. He was wearing a simple gray sweater. He looked like someone's grandfather. Not a billionaire. He didn't shake Daniel's hand right away. He looked at the bundled painting first. He said, "May I?" Daniel nodded. Gerald carefully unwrapped one corner of the bedsheet. Just enough to see part of the canvas. He looked at it for a long time. Then he wrapped it back up. He said, "Come inside." They sat in a room full of books. Real books. Worn spines, cracked covers. the kind of room that smelled like paper and old leather. Gerald poured 2 cups of coffee. He didn't ask how Daniel took his. He just brought it black and set it on the table. They talked for 2 hours, not about money. Not about art deals or galleries or careers. About life. About loss. Gerald talked too, which surprised Daniel. He talked about his own father, a mechanic. A man who had worked his whole life with his hands and never once told Gerald he was proud of him. Not once. He talked about building his company in his 20s. The obsession, the drive, what it cost him, relationships, time, a version of himself he never got back. He said, "I made it." And then I realized I had forgotten to feel anything along the way. Daniel listened. At one point, Daniel asked him why he had actually read the letter. Out of thousands. Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said his assistant had flagged it because it had no ask in it. No request for money or help or favors. Just a description of a painting. She had thought it was unusual. So had he. Unusual enough to open it himself on a Sunday morning. He said, that sentence at the end, about looking, I hadn't been looked at in a very long time either. The room went quiet after that. Outside, the winter light was fading. The bare trees were black shapes against a gray sky. Inside, 2 very different men sat across from each other in a room full of books, with a painting between them wrapped in a bedsheet. And something was being decided. Something neither of them had words for yet. But it was coming. Daniel could feel it. Before Daniel left that evening, Gerald made him an offer, not money. Not exactly. He said he had a building. A warehouse space he owned in downtown Pittsburgh. He had been planning to convert it into office space for one of his companies. Construction hadn't started yet. He said Daniel could have it for a year, free of charge. As the studio. Daniel stared at him. Gerald said, "Paint, just paint. Whatever you want. No obligations, no contracts, no deliverables, just a year to work." Daniel asked why. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something that Daniel would repeat many times in interviews years later. He said, "Because I think you have something that money can't manufacture. And I've spent my whole life manufacturing things. I'd like to watch someone make something real for once." Daniel didn't say yes immediately. He went home that night and sat with it. He thought about how strange it felt. How suspicious. He was a man who had learned that good things usually came with a price. A catch. Fine print, he called his only close friend, a woman named Rosa, a graphic designer who had known him since college. He told her everything. She was quiet on the phone for a while. Then she said, "Daniel, take it. Just take it." He took it. The warehouse was on Smallman Street. It had high ceilings, 20-foot windows, and concrete floors stained from decades of industrial use. It was cold at first, drafty, echoing. When Daniel walked in the first morning with his boxes of paint and brushes, his footsteps sounded very small in all that space, but he started working slowly at first, then faster. Then the way he had painted when he was 22 and just starting out and still believed entirely in what he was doing. The first month he painted 12 canvases, the second month, 9 more. Bigger ones. He started working large, floor to ceiling in some cases. Colors he had never used before. Shapes he hadn't known he had in him. Gerald visited twice. He didn't say much. He walked around. He looked. Once he stood in front of a large red and black canvas for almost 10 minutes without moving. Then he said, "Keep going." And Daniel did. By the third month, word had quietly started to spread. Rosa had photographed some of the paintings and shared them with a contact at a small art publication in New York. The contact had shared them with someone else. And then someone else. An email arrived from a gallery director in Manhattan. Then one from a journalist. Then 2 more galleries. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He wasn't sure how. He hadn't spoken the language of the professional art world in years. He had forgotten the vocabulary, the etiquette, The careful way people talked about things that were really about money without admitting they were about money. He showed Gerald the emails one afternoon. Gerald read them, nodded slowly. He said, "Do you know what you have now, Daniel?" Daniel shook his head. Gerald said, "Leverage. For the first time in your life, people are coming to you." Daniel thought about that for a long time after Gerald left. He was still broke, technically, still behind on past debts. The eviction from his old apartment was still on his record. He still ate cheap food and wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, but something had shifted. He wasn't the man who had walked to the post office in the rain with a letter and a last stamp anymore, or maybe he still was. But now the world was starting to realize what that man was carrying and what was coming next. None of them saw it coming. Not Daniel, not Gerald, not the galleries, not anyone. Asterisk, asterisk. The show almost didn't happen. 3 weeks before the opening, the gallery in Manhattan called to say they were pulling out. A bigger show had come in, a more established artist. They were sorry. They hoped Daniel understood. He understood. He had understood things like this his whole life, but Rosa didn't accept it. She called them back the same day. She was not a quiet person when she needed not to be. She argued. She pushed. She asked them directly if they had really looked at Daniel's work or just glanced at it. They said they had looked. She said, "Then look again." They did. They called back 2 days later. They were back in. The opening was on a Friday night in March, a small gallery in Chelsea. Not the biggest, not the most famous, but real. The kind of place serious people went to see serious work. Daniel wore the only good jacket he owned. Black, slightly too big in the shoulders. He had ironed his shirt 3 times because the iron he owned wasn't very good. Rosa fixed his collar in the car on the way there. He was terrified, not of failure. He had lived with failure for years. He was terrified of something harder, of hoping, of actually wanting this so much that it could break him. The show was called Look, one word. His idea. Gerald came. He arrived quietly, near the start. He stood near the back and watched the room more than the paintings. Daniel noticed him there. They nodded at each other across the crowd. That was enough. The room filled up faster than expected. By 8 o'clock it was crowded, warm, the kind of crowded that made the air feel alive. People stood close to the paintings. Some of them stood very still. Some of them talked in low voices. A few didn't talk at all. One woman cried. She was standing in front of the painting, the one Daniel had made the night his mother died. The big blue-green one. She didn't say anything to Daniel. She just stood there with tears on her face, not embarrassed, not trying to hide it. Daniel watched her from across the room. He felt something crack open in his chest. Not painfully. The way old wood cracks in warmth after a long winter. A journalist from a mid-sized arts magazine introduced herself. She asked if she could speak with him. He said yes. The interview lasted 12 minutes. She asked him what the letter to Gerald had been about. He told her. She asked what made him think Gerald would read it. Daniel said, "I didn't think he would. I just needed to send it." She looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote that down without saying anything. By the end of the night, 11 of the 22 pieces in the show had sold. Not all for large sums, but some for more than Daniel had made in the past 3 years combined. He stood outside the gallery at 11 o'clock. Rosa was inside talking to someone. The street was quiet, cold. The city moved around him the way cities do, indifferent, loud, and alive all at once. Gerald came outside and stood next to him. Neither of them said anything for a while. Then Gerald said, "How do you feel?" Daniel thought about it honestly. He said he felt like he was standing on the edge of something, and he wasn't sure if it was a cliff or a beginning. Gerald said, "In my experience, they're usually the same thing." A cab went by. Somewhere down the block, someone was laughing. The gallery light spilled out onto the wet sidewalk in a warm yellow rectangle. Daniel looked up at the sky, dark and full of city light. Somewhere behind it, the real stars. He didn't know it yet, but the journalist's article would be published in 4 days. And everything would change. The article ran on a Tuesday. The headline was simple. It said, "The artist who asked a billionaire to look." By Wednesday morning, it had been shared 40,000 times. By Friday, it was everywhere. The story traveled fast. Not because of the money, not because of Gerald Holt's name, but because of that sentence, that one sentence from the letter. "I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to look." People felt it in their bones. They shared it. They printed it out. They put it on their walls. Teachers put it on classroom boards. A therapist in Ohio said she read it to patients who felt invisible. A teenager in a small town in Georgia said it was the first thing she had ever read that made her feel like someone understood her. The painting sold. The blue-green one. The one of his mother. A museum in Philadelphia made an offer. A serious one. Gerald stepped back from the negotiation entirely. He told Daniel it was his painting to decide. Daniel accepted the museum's offer. It would hang in their permanent collection. He stood in the museum on the day they installed it. Just him and 2 workers who handled the piece carefully with white gloves, like it was fragile. Which it was. Just not in the way they knew. He thought about his mother. Her name was Catherine. She had been a nurse. She had worked double shifts most of his childhood. She had never had money either. But she had always found a way to buy him paint. Even when it meant she ate less that week. He had never told her how much that meant. He had meant to. There had always been more time. Until their WSN single quotes D. He stood in front of the painting in the museum and said her name quietly. Just once. The workers pretended not to hear. In the months that followed, Daniel's work continued to grow. More shows. More coverage. An artist residency in Florence for the following summer. A commission from a nonprofit that worked with children in under-resourced communities. They wanted him to run workshops. He said yes before they finished the sentence. Gerald and Daniel stayed in contact. Not constantly, but steadily. The way some connections do, not loud, not dependent, just present. Gerald attended another show the following year. He brought a woman with him. A quiet woman with kind eyes. He introduced her as an old friend. Daniel suspected she was more than that. He didn't ask. A year after the Chelsea show, a university invited Daniel to speak. A big one. He stood at a podium in a lecture hall that seated 800 people. His hands were sweating. He told the whole story from the beginning. The eviction notice. The cold soup. The $41. The letter. The stamp he couldn't really afford. When he got to the part about the sentence, "I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to look." The room went completely silent. He paused in that silence. He let it breathe. Then he said, "Most of us are waiting to be saved. We wait for someone to rescue us, to fix things, to notice. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just ask to be seen. Not fixed. Not saved. Just seen." He looked out at the 800 faces. He said, "That letter changed my life. But I don't think it changed it because a billionaire read it. I think it changed my life the moment I wrote it. The moment I decided I was worth speaking the truth to a stranger. The moment I stopped being invisible to myself." The room was quiet for a long time after that. Then it wasn't. The letter is framed now. It hangs in a small corner of the Philadelphia Museum, next to the painting it described. Most visitors walk past it without stopping, but some of them stop. They read it slowly. All 3 pages. They stand there in the quiet of the museum and read a dishwasher's words on the back of old printer paper, and some of them cry, and some of them take out their phones. Not to take pictures, to write something down. a thought they've been holding for a long time, an email they've been afraid to send, a truth they haven't said out loud yet. Daniel Mercer never became the most famous artist in the world. That was never the point, but he became something rarer, something harder to manufacture. He became proof that being seen is not luck, it is courage. And that sometimes courage fits in an envelope and costs the price of a single stamp and changes everything.